Okay, so now in this video, what we're going to do is put everything together that we've been learning. So before we start doing a couple problems, the first thing that you want to make sure to do is you want to always start from the inside out. And the way that I like to do it is kind of start off with this little circular method. So I like starting with the bx plus c first by doing the methods that we were doing in the previous video, then multiplying or working with the amplitude, and then finally work with the vertical shift if there is one. And same thing with the cosine. So the only thing that's different about the cosine, remember that it starts at 1 and the sine just starts at 0. Okay? So I kind of labeled it here a little bit of the directions on how to kind of go about it. So let's start off with the first problem. So here we want to find a graph 1 period, and we want to find the domain in the range. So the first thing to deal with is the guy in the inside. So that's what we're going to be dealing with first. So we know that one cycle is going to be between 0 and 2 pi. So that's where one cycle exists for the sine curve. We have 3x minus pi over 4 as our argument. We're going to ignore the 3 for now for the amplitude. So now what we're going to do, we're going to add pi over 4 to all three sides. So same thing we've been doing. And then you just have this 3x. You have a pi over 4 over here. And then here, what you're going to do is you're going to either use your calculator or use try to find the least common denominator. So you're going to have 2 pi plus pi over 4. That's going to give me 9 pi over 4. Then finally, we're just going to divide by 3. So this guy's going to give me pi over 12 x. And then this guy's going to give me, what is this, 3 pi over 4? Okay, so now we kind of figure out, we just found out where exactly my whole cycle is at. So one cycle will be between pi over 12, starting at pi over 12, and ending at 3 pi over 4. Okay, so let me just try to draw it. So here's pi over 12. Okay, and here is 3 pi over 4. So just try to eye it. Doesn't need to be perfect. All right, so now let's try to figure out the midpoints between these guys. Okay, so so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take, whoops. Here we go. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna figure out the midpoint between this and this. So we're gonna take pi over 12. I'm gonna add it to 3 pi over 4. And then we're going to divide it by 2. Okay, so if you have the TI-36X Pro, just start putting it into your calculator using the button right above the 7 with the fraction bar. If you don't have the TI-36X Pro, guess what? You have to do it by hand. Okay, so this guy's going to be, this is going to be a 12, and the other guy is going to be a 9 pi. So this is going to give me 10 pi over 12 divided by 2. Which is going to give me 10 pi over 24, which is going to give me 5 pi over 12. Okay. All right, so that means in the inside is going to be 5 pi over 12. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do the next part. So let's do pi over 12 and 5 pi over 12. So we're going to take 5 pi over 12, add it to pi over 12, and then divide it by 2. Luckily, this is already reduced, so this is going to be 6 pi over 12 over 2. This is going to give me 6 pi over 24, or reduced, it's going to give me pi over 4. So this guy right here is going to give me pi over 4. Okay. And now finally, all we gotta do is find out the other part, which is gonna be this guy and then this guy. So it's gonna be 5 pi over 12 plus 3 pi over 4 divided by 2. This one I'm just gonna put it in the calculator. So we're gonna have 5 pi over 12 plus 3 pi over 4, and we're going to divide this by 2, and we're going to get 7 pi over 12. Okay, so this guy's going to be 7 pi over 12. Okay. Okay, so now that we got all of the x points, now all we got to do is now look at the amplitude. So the amplitude before has been 1. Now it's 3. So now this guy's going to be at 3 and negative 3. Now there's no flipping. Okay? So remember, sine starts at 0. So the first point is going to be 0. Then it's going to be up to 1, which in this case now is 3, 0, negative 3, 0. So my graph kind of looks like this, since we're only looking for one period. Okay? Now for the domain, remember it's always going to be all real numbers, negative infinity to positive infinity. And the range in this case, you can see, is from negative 3 to 3. Okay, so there's basically the graph. So a lot more involved than the previous problems that we've been doing, with more fractions, which many of you maybe need a little bit of a recap with fractions, but I think it's good. Okay. Now let's do this problem. So, whoops, what happened? So here you have a lot of stuff going on. So you have something in the inside, you have a shift in the amplitude, you also have a flipping of the graph, and you also have a vertical shift. Okay, so let's first start off with the inside part. So you want to write 0 is less than or equal to x, less than or equal to 2 pi. So we're going to start off by writing the argument in the inside, which is going to be just this 2x plus pi. And this is going to be between 0 and 2 pi. Okay, so we're going to subtract by pi first. So you're going to have 2x less than or equal to pi, less than or equal to negative pi. Okay. So now what you're going to do is you're going to divide by this 2. So you're going to have x is going to be between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. So here is negative pi over 2 and then pi over 2. So you can kind of clearly see that the midpoint of these two numbers is just going to be 0. Okay, so that's kind of easy to see. Then halfway between pi over 2 and 0, well, we know that that's just going to be pi over 4. And then the other one's going to be negative pi over 4. Okay, so you can kind of clearly see it because you have a half, and half of a half is a fourth. And then you just have to multiply by the pi. Now, in this case, you have to be very careful because now that we're done with the x values, that's usually the hardest part. Now what we want to do is work with the y values, which is basically this 4. So now what's going to happen is that you know that the amplitude is not going to be up to 4. Okay, so it's not going to be up to, I'm going to write it down, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, and negative 4. Okay, so remember that the cosine curve starts at 1. So basically, starting at negative pi over 2, you're going to start at 4. However, this negative is basically flipping it. So you're actually flipping this graph. Okay, so instead of being up there, this guy is now going to be at negative 4. Okay, so now you're going to be down at negative 4. It's going to be negative 4, 0. Okay, then back up to 4, then 0, and then negative 4. So you can kind of see this downward shape of the cosine curve. Okay, so you kind of have that. Okay, now we're not done yet because notice that we also have this positive 2. And this positive 2 is shifting the entire graph upward. Okay, so we're going to shift up 2 units, up 2 units. So that's going to be the last thing. So I'm going to write it like this right here. Okay, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. My numbers are going to be the same, negative pi over 2, negative pi over 4, 0, pi over 4, and then pi over 2. And then I'm going to write -1, -2, -3. Okay, so now everything is going to be shifted up 2 units. So you can see that this guy right here was at -4, shifted up 2 units. So now I'm at -2. So this guy's going to be at -2. At negative pi over 4, I'm at 0, shifted up 2 units. I am now at 2. At 0, I can see that I'm at 4. I'm going to shift it up 2 units. So now I'm going to be at 6. For pi over 4, I'm at 0. Shifted up 2 units. I'm at 2. And then for pi over 2, I'm at -4. Shifted up 2 units. I'm at -2. So you can kind of see that the graph kind of looks like this. If I can draw right. Okay, so I'm a terrible drawer. Okay, so now the last thing that we got to do is find the domain and the range. Domain, remember, always -infinity to +infinity. The range now is going to be the lowest y value, in this case is this -2. So that's the lowest y value. The highest y value is going to be the 6. Okay, so that's going to be the domain and the range. Okay, so these graphs, expect a lot of these graphs on your next exam. So really make sure that you feel comfortable with these.